What happens when an alien species makes the fatal mistake of underestimating human biology? In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where countless species have risen and fallen, one truth remains constant. Never assume you understand your enemy. The Zephyrian Collective had studied humans for months, cataloging their weaknesses, analyzing their physiology, crafting the perfect biological weapon to eliminate the stubborn species that dared to resist their expansion. They called it Silent Dawn, a neurotoxin so potent that it could drop a charging cromlet beast in seconds, designed specifically to target human neural pathways. When Sergeant Maya Chen, lone survivor of the 47th Reconnaissance Unit, stumbled into their forward operating base, bleeding and exhausted, they saw the perfect test subject. What they didn't know was that humans had evolved on a death world where everything, from the air they breathed to the water they drank, was trying to kill them. What they didn't understand was that human survival instincts had been forged in the crucible of 10,000 years of warfare, adaptation, and sheer bloody-minded refusal to die. The Zephyrians were about to learn why humans had earned the nickname the Unkillable Apes among the more cautious species of the galaxy. They were about to discover that sometimes, when you think you've eliminated the threat, you've actually just given it time to rest. Maya Chen was about to show them what happens when you mistake human biology for weakness and human rest for surrender. The morning mist hung thick over the alien forest as Sergeant Maya Chen pressed her back against the twisted trunk of a crystalline tree. Her breathing labored and her combat armor cracked in 3 places. Blood seeped from a gash across her left temple, mixing with the sweat that stung her eyes. The plasma burns on her right shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, but she couldn't afford to acknowledge the pain. Not when the Zephyrian hunting party was less than 50 meters behind her, their chittering communication growing closer with each passing second. Maya wiped the blood from her eyes and checked her weapon. The pulse rifle had taken damage in the ambush that wiped out her unit 6 hours ago. The power cell showed only 12% charge remaining, enough for maybe 8 shots if she was lucky. The emergency beacon on her belt remained stubbornly silent. No rescue was coming. The 47th Reconnaissance Unit had been deep in enemy territory when the Zephyrians had sprung their trap, and Maya was the only one who had managed to break free from the killing field. The memory of her squad's final moments burned in her mind. Lieutenant Rodriguez had thrown himself on a plasma grenade to save the others. Private Kim had used her last magazine to buy Maya precious seconds to escape. Corporal Jackson had been caught in the crossfire while trying to establish communications with command. Good soldiers, all of them. They deserved better than to die on this alien rock, light years from home. A chittering sound echoed through the forest, followed by the distinctive hum of Zephyrian energy weapons charging. Maya forced herself to focus. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. She needed to stay alive long enough to complete the mission to get the intelligence about the Zephyrian forward base back to human command. The data chip secured in her armor contained tactical information that could save thousands of human lives across the sector. She moved carefully through the undergrowth, every step calculated to minimize noise. The Zephyrians had excellent hearing but relied heavily on their natural echolocation. If she could stay in their acoustic shadows, she might have a chance. The crystalline trees created strange sound patterns, distorting audio signatures in ways that could work to her advantage if she was clever about it. The forest around her was unlike anything on Earth. The trees grew in impossible spirals, their crystal bark refracting the light from Kepler, Bohr-42's twin suns into dancing patterns of color. Bioluminescent fungi dotted the forest floor like alien stars, pulsing in rhythms that seemed to respond to movement. It would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Right now, it was just another obstacle between her and survival. Maya reached a small clearing where 2 game trails intersected. She paused, listening. The chittering had stopped. That could mean the hunting party had lost her trail, or it could mean they were setting up an ambush. In her experience, aliens who had survived long enough to develop interstellar travel rarely made tactical mistakes. She had to assume the worst. She activated her armor's camouflage system, feeling the subtle shift as the adaptive mesh began matching the surrounding environment. The system was damaged but still functional enough to break up her silhouette. It wouldn't fool thermal imaging, but the Zephyrians seemed to rely more on sound and movement detection than heat signatures. Moving to the edge of the clearing, Maya spotted them. 3 Zephyrians, each about 2 meters tall, moving with the fluid grace that made them such effective predators. Their elongated heads swept back and forth as they searched, the sensory organs along their necks twitching as they processed acoustic data. Their scaled hide was a mottled gray-green that blended perfectly with the forest shadows, and their 4 arms each carried different weapons, energy rifles, neural disruptors, and what looked like capture nets crackling with electric current. They wanted her alive. That realization sent a chill down Maya's spine. Dead enemies were predictable. Live prisoners were valuable, which meant interrogation, experimentation, or worse. She'd read the intelligence reports about Zephyrian prisoner handling. The lucky ones died quickly, but the lead Zephyrian raised one of its 4 hands, and the hunting party spread out into a search formation. They knew she was in the area. Maya counted her options. She could try to circle around them, but that would cost time she didn't have. Her injuries were slowing her down, and exhaustion was beginning to cloud her judgment. She could engage them directly, but 3 against 1 with limited ammunition was a losing proposition. Then she saw it. A cluster of the bioluminescent fungi growing near the base of a massive crystal tree. The fungi were larger here, some the size of dinner plates, and they pulsed with an intense blue-white light. Maya had noticed earlier that the smaller ones reacted to movement and sound. If the larger ones were more sensitive, she picked up a small stone and threw it toward the cluster. The impact caused the fungi to flare brilliantly, their light reflecting off the crystal bark and creating a strobe effect that lit up the entire area. The Zephyrians reacted immediately, their heads snapping toward the light source, their echolocation organs working overtime to process the sudden sensory overload. Chaotic, Maya moved the moment their attention shifted. She sprinted along the edge of the clearing, using the crystal trees as cover while the aliens were distracted. Her boots made soft contact with the spongy ground cover, and she controlled her breathing to minimize any sound that might give her away. She was almost clear when the youngest Zephyrian, smaller than the others, probably a scout, turned in her direction. For a moment, their eyes met. Across 20 meters of alien forest, the creature's mouth opened, revealing rows of sharp teeth, and it began to raise its energy rifle. Maya's training took over. She dropped to one knee and brought up her pulse rifle in a single fluid motion. The weapon bucked against her shoulder as she fired twice in rapid succession. The first shot took the Zephyrian in the center of mass, sending it stumbling backward. The second shot removed its head entirely. The other 2 aliens reacted instantly, their weapons swinging toward her position. Maya rolled left as energy bolts sizzled past her, leaving smoking craters in the crystal bark behind her. She came up running, knowing that her position was compromised and that staying still meant death. The forest erupted into chaos as the Zephyrians gave chase. Energy weapons discharged continuously, turning crystal trees into clouds of superheated vapor. Maya sprinted through the maze of trunks, her armor system struggling to keep up with the thermal stress. Warning indicators flashed on her heads-up display as various components began to fail under the assault. She burst into another clearing, this one larger than the first, with a stream running down the center. The water was a pale green color and moved sluggishly, suggesting different minerals or atmospheric composition than Earth-normal H2O. Maya didn't have time to analyze it. The Zephyrians were right behind her. She spun around as they entered the clearing, her pulse rifle raised. Both aliens had their weapons trained on her, but they weren't firing. The lead Zephyrian, distinguished by elaborate scarring along its neck that probably indicated rank, made a series of clicking sounds that Maya's translator couldn't parse. Then it spoke in heavily accented standard. "Human soldier, you will surrender weapons. Come peacefully. We have questions." "I bet you do," Maya replied, keeping her rifle steady. "How about you come take them from me instead?" The Zephyrian's head tilted in what might have been amusement. "You are injured, weapon power low. We are 2, you are 1. This is simple mathematics, yes?" Maya couldn't argue with the logic, but she'd never been one to accept simple mathematics when her life was on the line. "Maybe. But I guarantee you'll lose at least 1 more before I go down. You want to be the one who volunteers?" For a long moment, the clearing was silent, except for the gentle burbling of the stream. Maya could see the Zephyrians communicating through subtle body language. probably debating whether she was worth the risk of a direct assault. Her peripheral vision caught movement, more shapes in the forest. Reinforcements were arriving. The decision was made for her. Anita tripped on her data chip, feeling the small heat pulse as the intelligence was burned beyond recovery. If she couldn't get the information home, at least the Zephyrians wouldn't benefit from it either. The scarred alien seemed to understand what she'd done, its posture shifting to aggressive anger. That was unwise, human. Now you are worth much less to us alive. Good, Maya said and opened fire. Her first shot caught the leader in the shoulder, spinning it around. The second Zephyrian returned fire immediately, but Maya was already moving, rolling toward the stream. Energy bolts tracked her movement, superheating the air around her. She felt her armor's power system fluctuate as the environmental controls struggled to cope. She came up firing, her shots forcing the aliens to take cover behind the crystal trees. The rifle's power indicator showed 4% remaining, maybe 2 shots left. The Bakover reinforcements were moving through the forest toward her position. In 30 seconds, she'd be surrounded. Maya made her choice. Picture, she sprinted toward the stream, not to cross it, but to follow it upstream. Water meant civilization eventually, and civilizations meant infrastructure. If she was going to die, she'd at least make it somewhere that might matter tactically. The Zephyrians pursued her along the stream bank, their movements more cautious now that they'd learned she could shoot back. Maya used every piece of cover available, darting between crystal formations and using the twisting path of the water to break line of sight. Her rifle power finally died, the weapon becoming an expensive club. That's when she saw the structure ahead. It wasn't natural, too regular, too purposeful. Some kind of installation built into the hillside where the stream originated. Zephyrian architecture was distinctive, all flowing curves and organic shapes that mimicked their natural aesthetic. This was definitely enemy territory, but it might also be her only chance. Maya approached the installation carefully, her dead rifle still held ready for show. The structure was larger than it had appeared from a distance, built into and around a natural cave system. Strange lights pulsed along its surfaces, and she could hear the hum of active technology. Power generation, life support, maybe communications equipment. The stream flowed out of the main entrance, suggesting that the installation tapped into an underground water source. Maya followed the water inward, her boots splashing softly in the shallow flow. The walls were covered in the same bioluminescent fungi she'd seen in the forest, but these had been cultivated and arranged in patterns that probably had meaning in Zephyrian culture. She passed several side chambers, most of them dark. Through one open doorway, she glimpsed what looked like scientific equipment, analysis stations, specimen containers, and monitoring systems that hummed with quiet activity. A research facility then, not a military base. That was both good and bad news. Researchers might be less combat-ready, but they'd also be more interested in keeping her alive for study. The main chamber opened up ahead of her, and Maya could see natural light filtering down from somewhere above. The stream widened into a small pool that reflected the bioluminescent patterns on the walls. And around the edges of the chamber, she could see workstations, sleeping areas, and what looked like a communications array. And Zephyrians, at least a dozen of them, all turning to stare at the blood-covered human who had just walked into their secret base carrying a weapon. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Maya smiled, raised her dead rifle, and said, "Knock, knock." The Zephyrians reacted with typical efficiency, some diving for cover while others reached for weapons. Maya used the confusion to her advantage, diving behind a workstation as energy bolts began filling the air above her head. The equipment around her sparked and smoked as shots went wide, and she realized that the aliens were trying to capture rather than kill her. That gave her a slight advantage, but not much of one. She low-crawled toward the communications array, hoping to either call for help or at least deny the aliens their ability to coordinate with outside forces. Her combat knife came out of its sheath as she moved, the monomolecular edge gleaming in the strange light. If she was going down, she'd take some of their infrastructure with her. A Zephyrian appeared around the edge of her cover, some kind of stun weapon in its hands. Doubt. Maya lunged forward with her knife, the blade sliding between the alien's ribs with surgical precision. The creature dropped without a sound, its weapon clattering across the stone floor. Maya grabbed the stun weapon and checked its settings. The controls were labeled in Zephyrian script, but the interface was intuitive enough. She cranked the power to maximum and hoped it would work on aliens as well as it did on humans. Two more Zephyrians rounded her position from different angles, trying to flank her. Maya rolled left and fired the stun weapon twice, the energy pulses dropping both aliens instantly. The weapon powered down, apparently the maximum setting drained its charge quickly. The remaining Zephyrians had taken cover and were calling out to each other in their clicking language. Maya couldn't understand the words, but the tone suggested they were coordinating some kind of assault. She needed to move before they could surround her completely. She sprinted toward the communications array, her knife ready for close combat. A Zephyrian emerged from behind a sleeping area and fired some kind of net weapon at her. Maya twisted aside, feeling the electrified mesh brush past her damaged armor. She closed the distance and put her knife through the alien's throat before it could reload. The communications array was more complex than she'd expected, with multiple screens showing what looked like tactical displays, resource allocations, and personnel rosters. Maya couldn't read the text, but the images were clear enough. This was definitely a forward operating base, and it was coordinating activities across a much larger area than she'd realized. Contact. She started cutting cables and smashing control surfaces, using her knife and the butt of her dead rifle to destroy as much as possible. Sparks flew as systems overloaded and several screens went dark. To definitely know where she was now, but the damage was worth it. An energy bolt sizzled past her head, close enough to singe her hair. Maya spun around to see the scarred leader from the forest standing at the chamber entrance, its weapon trained on her. The alien's shoulder was bandaged where she'd shot it, but it didn't seem to be seriously impaired. Enough, it said in standard. You have done sufficient damage, human. Surrender now, or we will be forced to use more aggressive methods. She disabled the communications array and taken out 5 aliens in close combat. But there were still too many left and her own resources were exhausted. Her armor was failing, her weapons were depleted, and she was running on adrenaline and stubbornness alone. But she wasn't done yet. Maya reached for one of the specimen containers she'd seen earlier, a cylindrical device filled with some kind of luminescent liquid. She held it up threateningly. Biological samples, she asked. Bet you'd hate to lose months of research. The scarred alien's posture shifted, and Maya knew she'd guessed correctly. The container probably held something important, maybe even dangerous if released improperly. You do not understand what you hold, human. That material could be harmful to both of us. Then I guess we'll find out together, Maya replied, and started to twist the container's seal. That's when they hit her with the neurotoxin. The dart struck her in the neck, right where her damaged armor had left a gap in coverage. Maya felt the impact but initially dismissed it as another stun weapon. Then the chemicals hit her bloodstream, and her vision began to blur. Silent dawn, the scarred alien said with what sounded like satisfaction. Designed specifically for human neural pathways, you will be unconscious in moments and dead within the hour. But do not worry, we will learn much from your remains. Maya's legs gave out, and she collapsed beside the damaged communications array. The specimen container rolled from her numb fingers, its contents glowing softly in the dim light. Her vision contracted to a narrow tunnel, and she could feel her heartbeat slowing. The Zephyrians approached cautiously, their weapons still ready. The scarred leader knelt beside her, its head tilting as it studied her face. Humans, it said thoughtfully, predictive. So determined, so violent, so ultimately fragile. We will dissect your brain to understand how your species thinks. Perhaps then we will finally comprehend why you resist our inevitable expansion.
Maya tried to speak, but her vocal cords weren't responding.
The neurotoxin was shutting down her nervous system with clinical efficiency. Her last coherent thought before unconsciousness took her was a fierce hope that someone, somewhere, would make these bastards pay for what they'd done to her squad. The first thing Maya noticed when consciousness crept back was that she was still alive, which seemed like an oversight on the Zephyrians' part. The second thing she noticed was that she was strapped to some kind of examination table in what could only be described as a laboratory straight out of a nightmare. The walls were lined with specimen jars containing things that might once have been alive, and the air hummed with the sound of machinery she didn't want to identify. Her head felt like it had been used as a bass drum in a particularly enthusiastic percussion section. Every muscle in her body ached, with the deep, bone-deep soreness that came from having her nervous system chemically hijacked and rebooted. Her mouth tasted like copper and ozone, and her vision kept sliding in and out of focus despite her best efforts to concentrate. But she was alive, and that meant the Zephyrians had made their first mistake. Maya tested her restraints carefully, trying not to alert any monitoring systems that she was conscious. The straps were some kind of synthetic material, strong but not unbreakable if she could find the right leverage point. Her armor had been removed, leaving her in the standard-issue bodysuit that regulated temperature and provided basic life support monitoring. They'd been thorough but not paranoid. Her subcutaneous emergency beacon was still in place, though it would be useless at this range from any friendly forces. The laboratory was larger than it had appeared from her position on the table. Publican workstations lined the walls, each equipped with analysis equipment that looked sophisticated enough to make a university researcher weep with envy. Holographic displays showed rotating molecular structures, cellular diagrams, and what looked like genetic sequences. The Zephyrians were definitely more advanced than human science in several fields, particularly biochemistry and neuroscience. A movement near one of the workstations caught her attention. A Zephyrian in what appeared to be scientific robes was hunched over a microscope, its four arms moving in precise coordination as it manipulated samples. This one was smaller than the soldiers she'd encountered, with more delicate features and skin that had a slightly different coloration, more blue-green than gray-green. Probably a researcher or technician rather than military personnel. Maya forced herself to remain still as the scientist worked, using the time to assess her situation more thoroughly. The room had two exits that she could see: the main entrance where she'd been brought in, and what looked like a service tunnel near the back of the laboratory. Emergency lighting strips suggested that the facility had backup power systems, which meant it was designed for extended operations rather than temporary deployment. The scarred leader entered the laboratory, moving with the confident stride of someone who owned the space. It approached the scientist, and they began communicating in their clicking language. Maya couldn't understand the words, but she could pick up emotional context from their body language and vocal tones. The scientist seemed excited about something, while the leader displayed what might have been impatience or frustration. After several minutes of discussion, the leader moved to Maya's examination table. It studied her face intently, and she forced herself to maintain the slow, steady breathing of unconsciousness, while fighting every instinct that screamed at her to move, to fight, to do something other than lie there passively. "I know you are awake, human," the alien said in standard. "Your species is incapable of maintaining proper unconscious respiration patterns when under stress. A fascinating evolutionary flaw that makes deception difficult for your kind." Maya continued her breathing pattern for several more seconds before finally opening her eyes and meeting the alien's gaze directly.
Just wanted to see how long you'd play along with my performance.
Dr. Vexhai here is quite impressed with your physiology. According to her analysis, you should have been dead 6 hours ago. The neurotoxin we used was specifically designed to target human neurochemistry with a 100% fatality rate in laboratory testing. Maya turned her head to look at the scientist, who had approached the table with what appeared to be excitement. The smaller alien held some kind of handheld scanner, which it waved over Maya's body while chattering enthusiastically. "She says," the leader continued, "that your brain chemistry is highly unusual. The toxin appears to have been metabolized by your liver at a rate that should have been impossible, and your neural pathways have already begun to regenerate the damage." She is most curious to understand how this occurred. "Clean living and regular exercise," Maya replied. "Body. Also spite. Never underestimate spite as a motivational factor." Dr. Vexhai made more clicking sounds, and the leader nodded. "She wishes to take additional samples for analysis. Blood, neural tissue, bone marrow, those. The usual requirements for a thorough scientific investigation." Maya tested her restraints again, more openly this time. The straps held firm, but she could feel a slight give in the connection point near her left wrist. "And if I refuse to cooperate with your scientific investigation? You are a specimen now, not a soldier. Whether you remain conscious during the procedures is a matter of scientific preference rather than practical necessity." The casual way the alien discussed her vivisection sent a chill down Maya's spine. But she'd been in worse situations before, probably. She couldn't think of any specific examples at the moment, but she was sure they existed. Dr. E. Bexai moved to a nearby instrument tray and began selecting tools. Maya recognized some of them from human medical equipment, scalpels, forceps, sample containers. Others were completely alien in design with purposes she didn't want to contemplate. The scientist handled each instrument with the care of an artist, selecting brushes, testing edges, and checking calibrations. Your species interest us greatly, the leader continued, seemingly unaware of or unconcerned by Maya's growing tension. Humans appear to be uniquely adaptable among the species we have encountered. Most civilizations develop along predictable technological paths, but humans consistently surprise us with innovative solutions to problems we considered solved. We're full of surprises, Maya agreed, working at the restraint near her wrist. And the connection point was definitely weakening, but she needed more time to work it free completely. Indeed, Dr. Vexai has theorized that human adaptability may be related to your species' unusual evolutionary history. Your homeworld is remarkably hostile compared to most life-bearing planets, which has resulted in biological systems that are robust beyond normal parameters. Maya couldn't argue with that assessment. Earth was a death trap compared to most worlds in the galaxy. Higher gravity, more aggressive weather patterns, and an ecosystem where everything was constantly trying to eat everything else. Humans had evolved in an environment where adaptation wasn't just advantageous, it was essential for survival. Dr. Vexay approached with a syringe filled with a soft red light. The scientist spoke to the leader, who nodded and turned back to Maya. A neural inhibitor. DAC will prevent you from losing consciousness again while she works. We want you to remain aware during the procedures for optimal data collection. End of section 17. How thoughtful, Maya said, and used the moment when the scientist leaned over her to finally snap the weakened restraint. Her left hand came free with a sharp crack of breaking synthetic material. She grabbed the syringe from Dr. Vexai's hand and drove it into the alien's neck in one fluid motion. The scientist staggered backward, making high-pitched sounds that were probably the Zephyrian equivalent of screaming. The leader reacted immediately, reaching for a weapon on its belt. Maya rolled off the examination table, taking the remaining restraints with her as she hit the floor. Her right hand was still secured to a strap, but she could work with that. She'd fought in worse conditions before. The scarred alien's weapon was some kind of energy pistol, sleek and organic-looking like most Zephyrian technology. Maya dove behind one of the workstations as it fired, the energy bolt turning a rack of specimen jars into superheated vapor. The smell of whatever had been preserved in those containers was indescribable and probably toxic. Maya looked around for anything she could use as a weapon. The laboratory was full of scientific equipment, but most of it was too delicate or specialized to be useful in combat. She needed something simple, direct, and immediately available. Dr. Vexai was still stumbling around, clutching its neck where Maya had injected it with its own neural inhibitor. Whatever was in that syringe was definitely having an effect. The scientist's movements were becoming more erratic, and its vocalizations were taking on a distressed quality. Controller. The leader fired again, the energy bolt destroying another section of laboratory equipment. Maya could hear more aliens approaching from the main corridor, probably attracted by the sounds of combat. She needed to end this quickly or risk being overwhelmed by superior numbers again. She found what she was looking for in a cabinet full of chemical supplies. The containers were labeled in Zephyrian script, but the molecular diagrams were universal: acid, base, organic solvents, and several things that looked extremely reactive. Maya grabbed the most promising candidates and started mixing them in a sample beaker. "Human!" the leader called out. "You cannot escape this facility. Surrender now and your death will be swift." "Thanks for the offer," Maya replied, shaking her improvised chemical cocktail, "but I'm going to pass." The mixture in the beaker was starting to smoke, which seemed like a good sign. Maya had taken enough chemistry courses to know that smoking chemical reactions were usually energetic chemical reactions, and energetic meant potentially explosive. She just had to hope that Zephyrian biochemistry was similar enough to Earth-based chemistry for her improvisation to work. She threw the beaker at the leader's position and dove in the opposite direction. The container shattered against a wall. and for a moment nothing happened. And the chemical mixture contacted something in the laboratory's atmosphere and ignited with a brilliant flash that lit up the entire room. The explosion wasn't large by military standards, but it was definitely impressive by laboratory standards. Equipment toppled, specimen containers shattered, and the leader's energy pistol went flying across the room. Maya felt the heat wave wash over her, and several small fires started among the scattered chemical supplies. Dr. Vexai had collapsed near the examination table, still conscious but clearly incapacitated by whatever had been in that syringe. Maya grabbed the alien's scanner and used it to smash the restraint still attached to her right wrist. The device sparked and died, but it had served its purpose. The scarred leader was pulling itself upright near the far wall, looking dazed but not seriously injured. Maya could hear voices from the corridor getting closer. The cavalry was definitely on its way. She needed to find another exit or prepare for a final stand with very limited resources. The service tunnel she'd spotted earlier looked more promising now that her other options were limited. Maya sprinted toward it, leaping over the scattered remains of scientific equipment. Behind her, the leader was shouting orders in the Zephyrian language, probably calling for reinforcements and medical assistance. The tunnel was narrow and poorly lit, with the same bioluminescent fungi providing the only illumination. Maya could hear water flowing somewhere ahead, suggesting that the tunnel connected to the underground stream system. If she could reach the water, she might be able to follow it out of the facility and back to the surface. She moved as quickly as she dared through the cramped space, her hands extended to feel for obstacles in the dim light. The tunnel curved and branched several times, and she tried to choose paths that led generally upward toward what she hoped was the surface. Behind her, she could hear sounds of pursuit. The Zephyrians had discovered her escape route. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber dominated by what appeared to be some kind of water processing facility. Large tanks and filtration systems lined the walls, and the sound of flowing water was much stronger here. Maya could see several pipe systems that probably connected to the surface, but they were too small for human passage. A Zephyrian emerged from the tunnel behind her, moving cautiously with its weapon drawn. Maya grabbed a wrench from a nearby tool rack and threw it at the alien's head. Her aim was off due to fatigue and poor lighting, but the wrench struck its weapon and sent it flying into one of the water tanks. The alien lunged at her, with its bare hands, all four arms reaching for grappling holds. Maya had trained in multi-limb combat scenarios, but the theory was very different from the practice. She managed to dodge the first grab and landed a solid punch to what she hoped was a vulnerable spot, but the alien's second pair of arms caught her around the waist. They struggled in the cramped space between the filtration systems. Maya's human strength pitted against the Zephyrian's superior reach and additional appendages. She managed to break free by driving her elbow into what appeared to be the alien's solar plexus equivalent, then followed up with a knee strike that doubled it over. More sounds of pursuit echoed from the tunnel. What to do? Maya needed to find another way out, and quickly. She examined the water processing systems more carefully, looking for any connection to the outside that might be large enough for human passage. Most of the pipes were too small, but there was one larger conduit that seemed to carry processed water toward the surface. Maya climbed into the pipe system, hoping it would lead to some kind of surface outlet. The pipes were just barely large enough for her to crawl through, and the metal was cold enough to leach warmth from her body through the thin bodysuit. The water trickled along the bottom of the conduit, making the surfaces slippery and treacherous. She crawled for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, following the gradual upward slope of the pipe system. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of Zephyrians trying to follow, but their larger size made progress difficult in the confined space. She had a temporary advantage, but it wouldn't last long. The pipe finally opened into what appeared to be a natural cave system. Maya emerged wet, cold, and exhausted, but definitely closer to the surface than she'd been in the laboratory. The cave wall showed signs of natural water flow, with mineral deposits and erosion patterns that suggested seasonal flooding. More importantly, she could feel a slight breeze that indicated a connection to the outside atmosphere. Cave system. Her hands outstretched to guide her in the darkness. The sound of water grew stronger, and eventually she emerged into a larger cavern, where an underground river flowed through natural channels carved from the rock. The water was moving quickly enough to suggest significant elevation changes ahead, possibly including a path to the surface. Maya waded into the underground river, gasping as the cold water soaked through her bodysuit. The current was strong but not overwhelming, and the river bottom seemed to be solid rock rather than treacherous mud or debris. She let the water carry her downstream, using her arms to steer around obstacles and maintain her position in the center of the flow. The river curved through several more caverns, each one slightly different in character. Some were narrow and filled with the sound of rushing water. Others opened into vast spaces where her breathing echoed off distant walls. The water temperature remained constant, suggesting a deep source that wasn't affected by surface weather conditions. After what felt like an eternity of following the underground river, Maya saw something that made her heart race with hope. Natural light, dim but definitely present, filtering down from somewhere above. She swam toward the light source and found herself at the bottom of what appeared to be a natural shaft that led to the surface. The shaft was steep but climbable, with enough handholds and ledges to make the ascent possible for someone with military training and a strong motivation to escape alien vivisection. Maya began the climb, her wet hands slipping occasionally on the rock surfaces but her determination driving her upward toward freedom. She emerged from the shaft into the alien forest just as Kepler, or 4-2's twin suns, were setting, painting the crystalline trees in shades of gold and crimson. Maya had never been so happy to see an alien sky in her entire life. She was free, she was alive, and she had information about Zephyrian operations that could be valuable to human command if she could find a way to transmit it. But first, she needed to address the small problem of being stranded on a hostile planet with no equipment, no communications, and no idea where the nearest human outpost might be. Maya looked around at the alien landscape and smiled grimly. She'd survived worse odds before, and the Zephyrians had just given her a very strong motivation to make sure she survived again. The neurotoxin they'd used on her was still affecting her system, causing occasional dizziness and muscle tremors, but her body seemed to be metabolizing it faster than they'd expected. Whatever evolutionary advantages had allowed humans to survive on their death world homeworld were apparently more significant than even the aliens realized. Maya oriented herself using the setting suns and began walking in what she hoped was the direction of human territory. Behind her, she could hear sounds of activity from the hidden research facility. The Zephyrians would be organizing search parties soon, and they'd be very motivated to recapture their escaped test subject. But they'd made one crucial mistake in their assessment of human biology and psychology. They'd assumed that surviving their neurotoxin was the end of Maya's resistance. They hadn't considered the possibility that it might just be the beginning of their problems. Maya Chen had been trained as a soldier, tested in combat, and forged by the same evolutionary pressures that had created humanity's reputation as the galaxy's most stubborn species. The Zephyrians had wanted to study human adaptability, and she was about to give them a very comprehensive demonstration of the concept. Maya had been walking for 3 hours when she first noticed she was being followed. The sounds were subtle. The soft scrape of scaled hide against crystal bark, the careful placement of feet trying to avoid the bioluminescent fungi that would betray movement in the darkness. Under normal circumstances, she might have missed the signs entirely, but the neurotoxin had left her nervous system hypersensitive to external stimuli, turning every sense up to maximum gain. She continued her steady pace through the alien forest, giving no indication that she'd detected the pursuit. Palace coaster in evasion and counter-tracking. But most of those techniques assumed human opponents with human limitations. The Zephyrians had 4 arms, superior hearing, and echolocation capabilities that made standard concealment tactics questionable at best. What they didn't have, Maya realized, was experience hunting humans who had grown up on a world where everything was trying to kill them. The forest around her was settling into its nocturnal rhythms. The bioluminescent fungi were pulsing more rapidly in the darkness, creating patterns that might have been beautiful if she hadn't been focused on survival. Strange sounds echoed through the crystal trees, alien wildlife going about their nightly business of hunting and being hunted. Maya filed away each new sound, building a mental catalog of what belonged in this environment and what didn't. Her pursuers were trying to be quiet, but they couldn't entirely suppress the clicking sounds that seemed to be an involuntary part of Zephyrian communication. The sounds were coming from at least 3 directions, suggesting a coordinated hunting party similar to the one that had originally captured her. They were probably using the same tactics that had worked before, surrounding their prey and gradually tightening the net until escape became impossible. Maya smiled grimly in the darkness. They were welcome to try. She began to alter her route, taking paths that led through denser undergrowth where the crystal trees grew closer together. The Zephyrians' superior size would work against them in confined spaces, and the increased concentration of bioluminescent organisms would make it harder for them to move without creating visible disturbances. As she moved, Maya began gathering resources. A sharp-edged fragment of crystal bark went into her left hand. A section of tough, fibrous vine found its way around her waist like a makeshift belt. Picture, small stones disappeared into the pockets of her bodysuit. The alien. Forest might not provide conventional weapons, but everything could be a weapon if you approached it with the right mindset. The clicking sounds were getting closer, and Maya could occasionally catch glimpses of movement through the trees. The hunting party was definitely coordinating their approach, probably using their natural echolocation to track her position while staying far enough away to avoid direct confrontation. They'd learned from her earlier escape. This time they were being patient and methodical. Maya reached a small clearing where several game trails converged. The area was more open than she would have preferred, but it offered multiple escape routes if her plan didn't work. More importantly, it was surrounded by a particularly dense concentration of the reactive bioluminescent fungi. She positioned herself at the center of the clearing and waited. The Zephyrians approached from 3 directions, just as she'd expected. They moved with practiced coordination, their weapons trained on her position while maintaining enough distance to avoid any desperate close-quarters attacks. The scarred leader was part of this group, and Maya could see the anger in its posture even at a distance. "You have caused considerable inconvenience, human," it called out in standard. "Dr. Vexhi's research has been set back by months, and several of my soldiers require medical attention. This ends now." "Does it?" Maya asked, her voice carrying clearly across the small clearing. "'Cause from where I'm standing, it looks like you made the same mistake twice. You're still trying to capture me instead of kill me, which means I'm still valuable to you alive." The leader's head tilted slightly, acknowledging the accuracy of her assessment. "Your biological resistance to our neurotoxins makes you an extremely valuable research subject. But Dr. Vexhi assures me that she can learn almost as much from your corpse as from a living specimen." "Almost isn't the same as exactly," Maya pointed out. "If you damage their prize specimen because you got impatient about weighing its options, probably calculating the risks of continued pursuit against the potential scientific value of keeping her intact." The other 2 Zephyrians were maintaining their positions but showing signs of restlessness. They wanted to close the trap and end the chase. Maya made the decision for them. She threw her handful of sharp stones directly at the nearest cluster of reactive fungi, then dove sideways as the organisms flared to life in brilliant blue-white pulses. The light reflected off the crystal trees and bounced around the clearing in a chaotic strobe effect that would play havoc with the aliens' echolocation and visual systems. The Zephyrians reacted predictably, their weapons tracking toward the light source while their enhanced senses struggled to process the sensory overload. Maya used the distraction to sprint toward the densest section of undergrowth, her movements masked by the continued pulsing of the disturbed fungi. She made it to the tree line before the first energy bolts started flying. The Zephyrians were firing blind now, their shots going wide as they tried to compensate for the visual interference. Maya kept moving, using every piece of cover available while working her way around the perimeter of the clearing. The leader was shouting orders in its native language, probably trying to coordinate the search while the other aliens dealt with their compromised sensory systems. Maya couldn't understand the words, but she could guess the content. They'd lost visual contact with their target and needed to re-establish tracking before she could escape entirely. Maya had no intention of escaping. Not yet. She circled around behind the leftmost Zephyrian, moving carefully through undergrowth that seemed designed to catch and hold anything that tried to pass through it. The alien was scanning the forest with its weapon raised, its head sweeping back and forth as it tried to reacquire her position. It was focused on the areas where she might be hiding, not on the possibility that she might be hunting it. "Daga," Maya struck from behind, driving her crystal shard into the gap between the alien's neck and shoulder, where its armor didn't provide complete coverage. The improvised weapon punched through scaled hide and found something vital. The Zephyrian dropped without making a sound, its weapon falling into the undergrowth. Maya grabbed the energy rifle and checked its power level. The weapon was unfamiliar, but the basic principle seemed universal. Point the dangerous end at your target and pull the trigger. The power indicator showed nearly full charge, and the weapon felt well balanced, despite being designed for four-armed use. The remaining two Zephyrians had noticed their companion's disappearance and were converging on its last known position. Maya let them come, using the dense foliage to mask her exact location while keeping them in sight. When they were close enough, she opened fire. The energy rifle kicked harder than she'd expected, but her first shot caught one of the alien's center mass and dropped it immediately. The second shot missed as her target dove for cover, but it succeeded in separating the survivors and forcing them into defensive positions. The scarred leader's voice cut through the forest. "Impressive, human. You have reduced my hunting party to a single survivor, and by the forces we have stationed throughout this region. Surrender now, and I will ensure your death is swift." Maya's response was another energy bolt that turned a section of crystal tree into superheated vapor inches from the leader's position. Counteroffer. You surrender to me, and I'll consider letting you live long enough to explain why you thought poisoning me was a good idea. She could hear the alien moving through the undergrowth, trying to circle around for a flanking attack, keeping mobile, while maintaining visual contact with the area where she'd last seen her opponent. The energy rifle had enough charge for maybe 6 more shots, and she needed to make each one count. The sound behind her made Maya spin around, weapon ready. But instead of a Zephyrian, she found herself facing one of the alien world's native predators. The creature was about the size of a large dog, with 6 legs and what appeared to be natural armor plating along its back. Its multiple eyes reflected the bioluminescent fungi like tiny stars, and its mouth revealed far too many teeth for Maya's comfort. The predator seemed as surprised to encounter a human as Maya was to meet it. For a moment they stared at each other across 10 feet of forest undergrowth. Then the creature made a sound like a cross between a growl and a whistle, and Maya realized she had bigger problems than just the remaining Zephyrian. The scarred leader chose that moment to attack, bursting from cover with its weapon blazing. Maya dove sideways, rolling under a low-hanging crystal branch as energy bolts sizzled through the space where she'd been standing. The native predator reacted to the sudden violence by doing what predators do. It attacked the nearest moving target. Security. Unfortunately, that was Maya. She brought the energy rifle up just as the creature launched itself at her, all 6 legs extended for maximum impact. A shot took its center mass, but the creature's momentum carried it forward into a collision that knocked Maya flat on her back and sent her weapon flying into the darkness. The predator was definitely dead, but it was also definitely heavy. Maya struggled to push the corpse off her body while keeping an eye out for the surviving Zephyrian. She could hear movement in the undergrowth, but whether it was more native wildlife or her remaining pursuer was impossible to determine. She finally freed herself from under the dead predator and began searching for her lost weapon. The energy rifle had landed somewhere in the dense undergrowth, and finding it in the dim, bioluminescent light was proving more difficult than she'd hoped. Maya could hear the Zephyrian getting closer, probably drawn by the sounds of her struggle. A shadow moved between the crystal trees, and Maya caught a glimpse of scaled hide and raised weaponry and table. She grabbed the first thing that came to hand, a section of the fibrous vine she'd collected earlier, and prepared for close combat. The scarred leader emerged from the undergrowth with its energy pistol trained on her position. "An interesting demonstration of human adaptability," it said. "You have survived our neurotoxin, escaped from our research facility, eliminated most of my hunting party, and even managed to kill one of this world's apex predators with an unfamiliar weapon. Most impressive." Maya kept the vine ready, looking for an opening. "Thanks, I've been working out. This display of competence has convinced me that keeping you alive poses too great a risk to our operations in this sector. Dr. Vexai will have to make do with studying your remains." The alien raised its weapon, finger moving toward the trigger. Maya threw herself sideways, but she knew she wouldn't be fast enough to avoid the energy bolt entirely. At this range, even a glancing hit would probably be fatal. The shot never came. Instead, Maya heard a sound like tearing metal, followed by the Zephyrian's scream of pain and surprise. She rolled behind a crystal tree and looked back to see the alien leader staggering backward, 3 parallel gashes across its chest leaking dark fluid. Down behind it was another of the native predators, this one larger than the first and apparently very unhappy about something. The scarred leader fired at the new threat, but the creature was already moving, its 6 legs carrying it through the undergrowth with a fluid grace that reminded Maya uncomfortably of the Zephyrians themselves. The alien's shots went wide, and then the predator was on top of it, claws and teeth finding gaps in armor with lethal precision. Maya didn't wait to see the outcome of that particular battle. She found her dropped energy rifle and began moving away from the sounds of combat, leaving the Zephyrian to deal with the consequences of wandering into someone else's territory. The alien forest had its own rules, and apparently those rules didn't make exceptions for superior technology. She was a quarter-mile away when the screaming stopped. Maya continued through the forest, now much more aware of the sounds around her and the possibility that she wasn't the only predator active in the area. The native wildlife seemed to be more aggressive at night, and her earlier encounter had demonstrated that the local food chain included several species capable of taking down armed opponents. But she was alive, she was free, and she had acquired a functional weapon. More importantly, she'd learned something significant about Zephyrian psychology and tactics. They were methodical and technologically superior, but they could be overcome by someone willing to take calculated risks and use their environment creatively. The neurotoxin effects were finally beginning to fade, leaving Maya with a clearer head and steadier hands. Her enhanced sensory sensitivity was gradually returning to normal levels, which was both a relief and a loss. The hypersensitivity had been useful for detecting threats, but it was also exhausting to maintain. Maya found a defensible position in a cluster of crystal trees and settled in to rest and plan her next move. She had a weapon, she had some understanding of the local hazards, and she'd proven that Zephyrian forces could be defeated by a single, determined human with the right tactics. Now she needed to decide what to do with that knowledge. The research facility was still operational, and it probably contained information that would be valuable to human command. Scientific data, personnel rosters, operational plans, communications logs, all the intelligence that could help humanity understand their enemy and plan more effective resistance. So Maya checked the power level on her captured energy rifle. Still enough charge for several shots, assuming she could figure out how to operate the alien technology reliably. The weapon's controls were intuitive enough for basic functions, but she suspected there were more advanced settings that would require deeper understanding of Zephyrian engineering. She made her decision. The facility represented an opportunity that might not come again, and Maya had always believed that the best defense was a good offense. The Zephyrians had made the mistake of underestimating human biology and determination. Now she was going to show them the consequences of that error. Maya Chen had been a soldier, a prisoner, an experimental subject, and prey. Now she was going to be something the Zephyrians had never encountered before. She was going to be their nightmare. Maya spent the remaining hours before dawn studying the research facility from a concealed position on the hillside overlooking its main entrance. The Zephyrians had increased security since her escape, with guards posted at regular intervals and patrol drones making sweeping circuits of the perimeter. The activity level suggested they were either preparing for evacuation or expecting reinforcements. Neither prospect particularly appealed to her, but Maya had advantages now that she'd lacked during her first encounter with the facility. She understood the layout, she knew the locations of critical systems, and she'd learned how Zephyrian technology worked under stress. Most importantly, she was no longer fighting for her life. She was fighting for revenge, and revenge was a much more focused motivation than mere survival. The alien dawn came slowly, the twin suns of Kepler 442 rising in sequence to paint the crystal forest in shifting patterns of light and shadow. She had vision to identify blind spots in the security coverage and plan her approach routes. The Zephyrians were methodical in their defensive arrangements, but they were also predictable. They thought like scientists rather than soldiers, which gave her tactical opportunities. The first guard patrol passed beneath her position at regular 15-minute intervals, following a route that took them around the facility's perimeter but didn't include random variations or backtracking. FBI timed their movements carefully, noting that the patrols consisted of 2 Zephyrians armed with energy rifles and what appeared to be communication equipment. Standard procedure would be to eliminate the patrols quietly to prevent them from raising alarms, but Maya had a different plan. She wanted them to know she was coming. Maya worked her way down the hillside, moving carefully to avoid triggering any sensors the Zephyrians might have placed in the approaches to their facility. Her captured energy rifle was fully charged and ready, and she'd spent the night figuring out its more advanced functions. The weapon had settings for different power levels, beam widths, and what appeared to be some kind of targeting assistance system that she didn't fully understand but was willing to experiment with. The patrol was approaching the eastern perimeter when Maya stepped out of the crystal trees and called out to them in standard, "Good morning. Beautiful day for a walk, isn't it?" The two Zephyrians reacted with admirable speed, bringing their weapons to bear while simultaneously activating their communication devices. Maya let them complete their alarm call before opening fire. Her first shot dropped the left guard instantly, while her second shot deliberately missed the right guard by inches, sending him diving for cover behind a cluster of bioluminescent fungi. The surviving guard began shouting into his communicator, probably reporting that the escaped human had returned and was actively engaging security forces. Maya fired another shot that turned a section of crystal tree into vapor near the guard's position, then withdrew back into the forest before reinforcements could arrive. Phase 1 was complete. The Zephyrians now knew she was in the area and actively hostile. They would respond by increasing security, calling in additional forces, and probably accelerating whatever evacuation or reinforcement schedule they'd been working on, all of which would create the chaotic, target-rich environment that Maya needed for Phase 2. She circled around to the facility's northern approach, where the stream emerged from the underground complex. This was the route she'd used to escape, and the Zephyrians had probably reinforced it since then, but they were thinking defensively, trying to prevent another escape rather than preparing for an attack from that direction. Maya could see additional guards stationed near the stream outlet, and what looked like some kind of sensor array that would detect movement in the water. The Zephyrians had learned from her previous escape route, but they'd also created a concentration of forces that presented an opportunity for someone willing to take aggressive action. Great. She moved upstream from the facility, following the water course through the forest until she found what she was looking for. A natural dam formed by fallen crystal trees that had created a small lake behind the obstruction. Carefully, noting the stress points where the crystal logs were balanced against each other and the natural rock formations. The energy rifle's highest power setting was designed for anti-vehicle work rather than anti-personnel combat. Maya aimed carefully at the most critical support point and fired. The crystal log exploded in a shower of superheated fragments, and the entire natural dam began to collapse. Maya was already running downstream when the water hit. The flood was everything she'd hoped for and more. Thousands of gallons of backed-up stream water roared through the forest, carrying debris, uprooted fungi, and anything else that couldn't get out of the way fast enough. Maya sprinted alongside the flood, staying just ahead of the water while it carved a new channel toward the Zephyrian facility. Guards, stationed near the stream outlet, had perhaps 30 seconds of warning before the wall of water hit them. Maya saw them scatter, some diving for higher ground while others tried to activate emergency communications. Then the flood swept over their position, carrying away sensor arrays, communication equipment, and at least 2 aliens who weren't fast enough to reach safety. Perimeter, just as the emergency alarms began sounding. The flood had damaged several external systems and created enough chaos to mask her approach. She could see Zephyrians running between buildings, some trying to assess flood damage while others prepared defensive positions. She waited until she had a clear shot at what appeared to be a power distribution station, then fired her energy rifle at maximum setting. The explosion was spectacular, sending cascades of alien sparks across the facility and plunging several sections into darkness. Emergency lighting activated throughout the complex, but the sudden power loss had clearly disrupted their security systems. Maya moved toward the main entrance, staying low and using the confusion to mask her approach. The Zephyrians were trying to organize a coherent response, but they were dealing with flood damage, power failures, and the knowledge that a single human had somehow managed to launch a coordinated attack on their fortified position. A group of 5 aliens emerged from the main entrance, all armed and moving with military precision. Maya recognized the scarred leader among them. Apparently, he'd survived his encounter with the native predator, though he showed fresh injuries and moved with obvious pain. The group spread out in a defensive formation, their weapons scanning the approaches for targets. Maya gave them one. With Tuver, she stepped out from behind a damaged power relay, and opened fire with her energy rifle on full automatic. The weapon discharged its entire power cell in a continuous beam that swept across the Zephyrian formation like a sword of light. 3 aliens dropped immediately, while the scarred leader and 1 other dove for cover behind the facility's entrance structure. The energy rifle's power cell was now completely drained, but Maya had expected that. She threw the useless weapon aside and pulled out the improvised explosive she'd prepared during the night. Chemical compounds from Dr. Vexhi's laboratory, mixed with reactive elements from the alien forest, all contained in sample containers that would fragment into deadly shrapnel when detonated. She threw the first improvised grenade at the entrance structure, then ran toward the facility's side entrance while the explosion masked her movement. The blast was smaller than the power station explosion, but much more focused, sending crystal fragments and alien debris in all directions. Maya reached the side entrance just as a group of Zephyrians emerged to investigate the explosions. She activated her second improvised explosive and rolled it into their midst before diving behind a decorative crystal formation. The detonation caught the aliens by surprise, dropping 2 and sending the others scrambling for cover. The facility's interior was in chaos when Maya finally breached the main complex. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls, and she could hear Zephyrians calling out in their native language as they tried to coordinate a response to her assault. Maya moved through the corridors she remembered from her earlier escape, but now she was the hunter rather than the prey. She found the first group of scientists in what appeared to be a computer center, frantically trying to download data from their research systems before evacuating. Maya appeared in the doorway with her last improvised explosive ready. "Good morning, Doctor Vexhi," she said to the scientist, who had wanted to vivisect her. "Remember me?" The Zephyrian researcher looked up from her computer terminal, and Maya could see recognition and fear in the alien's expression. Dr. Vexhi began chittering rapidly in her native language, probably trying to communicate with Maya or call for help. "I don't speak your language," Maya said conversationally, "but I'm pretty sure you understand Standard. So let me make this simple. You poisoned me. You strapped me to a table and planned to cut me open while I was still conscious. Now I'm here to return the favor." Dr. Vexhi backed away from the computer terminal, her 4 hands raised in what might have been a gesture of surrender or supplication. The other scientists in the computer center had frozen at their workstations, unsure whether to run or try to help their colleague. Maya made the decision for them. She activated her last explosive and threw it into the center of the computer bay, then turned and walked away as the blast destroyed months of research data and scientific equipment. The screams and chittering behind her were probably protests about the destruction of irreplaceable information, but Maya found she didn't particularly care about Zephyrian scientific progress. She made her way to the main laboratory where her ordeal had begun. The room was empty now, the examination table where they'd strapped her down abandoned in the rush to evacuate. Maya looked around at the scientific equipment, the specimen containers, the monitors that had displayed her vital signs while Dr. Vexhi prepared to dissect her. Then she began methodically destroying everything. Maya used pieces of broken equipment as improvised clubs, smashing delicate instruments and shattering containment vessels. Toxic chemicals mixed with alien specimens created noxious clouds that would make the laboratory uninhabitable for any species. She overloaded power systems and short-circuited monitoring equipment until the room was filled with sparks and toxic smoke. The scarred leader found her there, standing in the ruins of what had once been a sophisticated research facility. The alien was breathing heavily and leaking dark fluid from multiple wounds, but he still held an energy pistol in one of his hands. "You have destroyed months of scientific research," he said in Standard. "Knowledge that could have benefited multiple species across the galaxy." Maya wiped alien blood from her hands and turned to face him. "You're right. I've destroyed your research. I've killed your scientists. I've turned your secret facility into a smoking ruin. And I'm not done yet." The scarred leader raised his weapon. "You are one human against the entire Zephyrian collective. Your species will fall to our expansion whether you live or die. This gesture of defiance is ultimately meaningless." "Placer." Maybe Maya agreed. "But here's the thing about humans that you never quite figured out. We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because the alternative is surrender. And surrender isn't in our vocabulary." The alien's finger moved toward the trigger of his energy pistol. Maya smiled and pulled the pin from the thermal grenade she'd taken from the facility's weapons locker. By the way, she added, your neurotoxin didn't kill me because humans evolved on a world where everything was poisonous. We've been building up resistance to toxic compounds for 50,000 years. You should have done more research. The thermal grenade detonated with the force of a small star, vaporizing everything within a 50-meter radius and turning the Zephyrian research facility into a crater of molten crystal and superheated metal. Accident. The explosion was visible from orbit, a pillar of fire that announced to anyone watching that the human soldier they'd captured and poisoned had kept her promise to make them pay. Maya Chen died in that explosion, but her legacy lived on in the intelligence reports that eventually reached human command. Analysis of the crater revealed traces of Zephyrian technology, biological samples, and research data that provided valuable insights into alien capabilities and intentions. The facility's destruction disrupted collective operations in the entire sector and forced them to reconsider their assessment of human resistance capabilities. Most importantly, word of Maya's final stand spread throughout human space, carried by refugees, merchants, and military communications. The story of the soldier who survived alien poison, escaped from their laboratory, and then returned to destroy their entire research facility became legend. Variations of the tale appeared in a dozen different versions, but they all ended the same way, with a reminder that humans don't surrender, and they don't forgive. The Zephyrian Collective eventually learned to approach human territory with more caution, understanding that they faced an enemy that would rather die fighting than live in submission. They never did figure out why their carefully designed neurotoxin had failed to kill Sergeant Maya Chen, but they made sure their subsequent biological weapons were tested more thoroughly before deployment. And in the deep space monitoring stations where human scientists studied alien communications, researchers noted an interesting linguistic development in Zephyrian military transmissions. They had developed a new phrase, roughly translated as sleeping death walker, which they used to refer to human soldiers who had survived chemical weapons attacks. The phrase carried connotations of something that appeared defeated but was actually gathering strength for a final, devastating assault. Something that looked like prey but was actually a predator. Something that would rather destroy itself than allow its enemies to profit from its capture. In the end, Maya Chen had given her species something more valuable than intelligence about alien technology or tactical analysis of enemy capabilities. She had given them a reputation. The Zephyrians would never again make the mistake of assuming that a human who appeared defeated was actually beaten. Because sometimes, when you think you've eliminated the threat, you've actually just given it time to rest. And when humans wake up from their rest, they wake up angry. The galaxy learned to remember that lesson. Maya Chen made sure of it.